All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at this idea of like wartime and peacetime in tech companies.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fascinating way to think about how these companies, they change their whole approach depending on what they're up against.
hmm
Almost like, you know how a chameleon changes color to fit in?
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, our main source for this deep dive is an article by Gurjli Oras. It was published on The Pragmatic Engineer back in March 2023.
Okay.
And, you know, I think our listeners are really interested in what goes on behind the scenes at these tech companies.
Sure.
And trust me, this deep dive is going to give you a real insider's look at what it's like in these really high-pressure environments.
It's a unique perspective.
Mhm.
It helps you understand not only the strategies these companies use, but also how the culture changes when a company is fighting to survive versus when it's just focused on growing steadily.
Yeah, and Oris actually starts his article with this personal story that really sets the scene.
Okay.
He talks about his time working on Uber's big mobile app rewrite back in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and he describes it as like the craziest march he's ever been a part of.
Wow.
80-plus hour weeks, working 7 days a week, often past midnight. It sounds intense.
That's definitely wartime in a nutshell.
It is, right. It's like all about survival, and every decision, every line of code is just driven by this need to win.
Yeah, definitely a completely different mindset.
So to really unpack this whole wartime and peacetime thing,
Mhm.
we got to go back to Ben Horowitz. He's kind of like a legend in Silicon Valley.
Right. He really popularized this concept.
Yeah, and Horowitz, he describes a peacetime CEO as someone focused on expanding the market. They're thinking big picture, building on what's already working.
It's all about steady, sustainable growth.
Right, the long game.
Yeah.
But then you've got the wartime CEO, and things get a lot more serious.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're right there in the trenches, they're laser focused on fighting off threats, and every little detail matters.
They're just completely obsessed with winning no matter what.
Yeah, and it shows in how they lead. Horowitz says that, and this is a great quote, peacetime CEOs build recruiting machines. Wartime CEOs build machines for layoffs.
It's a stark difference.
It really is. It
Yeah.
just emphasizes that during wartime, survival trumps everything else. And it's not just about the people, it affects the whole company culture.
Exactly. Horowitz also says that peacetime CEOs define the culture, wartime CEOs let the war define the culture.
The pressure just takes over.
It really does.
It's funny, though, how much this military language has become part of the tech world. It's not just wartime and peacetime. You
Yeah.
hear deadline, pager alert, all hands on deck, even postmortem.
It's like they're fighting a battle, but online.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, the tech industry is just so competitive and fast-paced.
It really is.
It's like innovation and speed can make or break a company.
So it's not just about using cool phrases, it reflects the high-stakes reality of the industry.
Okay, so let's say you're working at a tech company, or maybe you're just fascinated by this whole scene. How can you tell if a company is like shifting into this wartime mode? What are the signs?
One of the first things you might notice is a change in communication from the leadership, especially the CEO.
Okay.
They'll often start using language that conveys a sense of urgency.
So if the CEO suddenly starts talking about battles and fighting, that could be a sign.
Could be, yeah.
Interesting.
But it's not just about the words. You have to look at the actions, too.
Wow.
See if their priorities have shifted.
What kind of priorities are we talking about?
Well, suddenly, everything becomes about things like revenue or market share, whatever metrics are critical for survival at that moment.
Okay.
Everything else gets put on the back burner.
And what about performance reviews? Do those change too?
Yeah, they often become stricter. The focus is laser focused on results.
Got it.
And there's less tolerance for anything that's not contributing directly to those wartime goals.
You might even see more performance improvement plans, or PIPs as they're called.
Right, which can be a sign that layoffs are coming.
Speaking of layoffs, those are a pretty clear sign of wartime, right?
Well, it's not always that simple.
How so?
Layoffs can happen for lots of reasons, so it's important to look at a bunch of different factors before you decide that a company has gone full wartime.
So it's more like a puzzle. You got to put all the pieces together.
Exactly.
Okay, this might sound strange, but Oraz mentions that some engineers actually kind of miss the intensity of wartime.
Really?
Yeah. Why do you think anyone would miss all that pressure and stress?
Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but for some people, wartime can be really motivating and empowering.
Okay.
They thrive on the autonomy, the fast decision-making, and the sense of purpose that comes with fighting for a common goal.
So it's less about the stress and more about feeling like they're part of something bigger.
Precisely.
And when a company goes back to peacetime, things tend to slow down. Process becomes more important than speed, decisions take longer, and sometimes that sense of urgency just fades away.
And for some engineers, that can be a bit stifling.
Yeah, like they miss that adrenaline rush.
It's important to remember, though, that both peacetime and wartime have their own advantages and disadvantages.
Right? There's no one right way to be.
Exactly.
So let's talk about peacetime for a bit. I mean, it's not all perfect, right? There are definitely downsides to slowing down and focusing more on process.
Absolutely. In peacetime, the focus shifts to sustainability and long-term planning.
Right.
But that can sometimes lead to more bureaucracy and slower decision-making,
Which can be frustrating.
especially for those who are used to that rapid pace of wartime.
And I imagine there's more room for internal politics when things aren't quite so intense.
That's a good point. When a company's not fighting for survival, individual agendas and power struggles can start to emerge.
But peacetime isn't all bad. It gives companies a chance to catch their breath, consolidate their wins, and invest in things like employee well-being, which often get neglected during those crazy wartime periods.
That's true. It's an opportunity to create a more balanced and sustainable work environment.
And also a time to focus on innovation in a more strategic way.
Right. Wartime is often about moving fast and getting things out the door.
But peacetime allows for more time and resources to be dedicated to research and development.
Exactly.
So both phases are actually important for a company's success in the long run.
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Now, let's talk about something that often comes up when we discuss wartime versus peacetime, and that's tech debt.
Tech debt, yeah.
A lot of people assume that wartime leads to a ton of tech debt because companies prioritize speed over quality.
Makes sense.
But Oras actually has some interesting insights that challenge this idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what he has to say.
He actually argues that the limitations of wartime can actually encourage creative solutions that minimize tech debt.
Huh, that's interesting.
Think about it. When you have limited time and resources, you're forced to be more resourceful.
Okay.
You have to find ways to build things efficiently and in a way that's easy to maintain because you'd be the one dealing with the consequences later.
It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly. And Oros points out that engineers in wartime are really motivated to improve maintainability for a simple reason. They don't want to burn themselves out.
Yeah, they don't want to be constantly fixing problems caused by poorly written code.
Right. And here's another interesting point he makes. Rewriting systems is often easier to justify during wartime.
Why is that?
Well, when a company is facing a serious threat, it's easier to get people on board with making big changes that might be resisted during peacetime.
Oh, I see.
So instead of holding on to outdated systems, companies are more willing to invest in building things the right way from the start.
So wartime can actually lead to a cleaner architecture and less tech debt in the long run.
That's what Oros argues, yeah.
That's pretty counterintuitive.
It is, right.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as saying wartime equals bad code and peacetime equals good code.
It's definitely more nuanced than that.
And understanding these nuances can be really helpful, whether you're an engineer, a manager, or just someone who's interested in how tech companies work.
I agree.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about people, right? How they react to pressure, how they adapt to change, and how they make decisions under stress.
Absolutely. And these dynamics play out in all kinds of industries, not just tech.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the definitions of wartime and peacetime, the signs that a company might be switching between these modes, and even the impact on tech debt.
We've covered a lot.
But we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the transition back to peacetime,
Okay.
how to spot those subtle shifts,
Okay.
and whether a company can actually stay in wartime mode indefinitely.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to that.
We'll be right back. So we just explored how even in the middle of wartime, those limitations can actually lead to some really creative solutions and maybe even less tech debt.
Right. It's kind of surprising.
But now let's flip things over and look at going back to peacetime.
okay.
You know how companies don't usually announce that they're entering wartime?
Yeah,
Well, they don't exactly send out a press release when things are calming down either.
that's true.
So how can anyone listening, how can they spot those signs that a company is maybe moving away from that fight or flight mode?
Well, one of the clearest signs is a big change in leadership, especially the CEO.
Okay, like what do you mean?
So if a new CEO comes in and their main goal is to stabilize the company or maybe get it ready for an IPO,
Hmm.
that can be a sign that peacetime is coming.
It's like a new chapter, a new direction.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Another thing to look for is if the company is less focused on those really key business goals that were so important during wartime.
Right. Like they're not so obsessed with beating the competition anymore.
Exactly. Remember, wartime is all about that laser focus and urgency.
Hmm.
When that starts to fade, it might mean the company is sailing into calmer waters.
So if they were all about market share before, and now they're talking more about employee well-being or sustainability, that could be a clue.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Interesting.
And you might see this shift reflected in company policies, too.
Oh, like how?
Well, maybe they start offering better parental leave, or they give employees a wellness budget, or they just really emphasize work-life balance.
Okay.
These are all things that often get forgotten during wartime,
Right.
but they become important again as the company tries to keep its employees happy and create a more sustainable work environment.
So if all of a sudden there are all these perks and benefits popping up, that could be a sign that peacetime is on its way. I like it. It's like they're shifting from just surviving to actually thriving.
That's a good way to put it.
And for those who are managers, you might notice a change in how performance is measured.
Oh, yeah.
During wartime, it's all about the results, shipping products, hitting targets, whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
But as the company moves to peacetime, do you think the focus shifts to include not just the what, but also the how?
You're right. The how definitely becomes more important in peacetime.
Interesting.
Things like following the process, working well with others, even how you handle disagreements, all those things start to count more in performance reviews. And when they're deciding who gets promoted.
So it's not just about hitting those numbers anymore. It's about how you get there.
Right.
And I bet that's a welcome change for some employees who maybe felt burnt out or unappreciated during wartime.
Probably.
Now, here's something I found interesting that Oras mentioned. Companies rarely announce publicly that they're transitioning back to peacetime.
Yeah, that's true.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's almost this unwritten rule in tech that you always have to look like you're moving at a crazy fast pace.
Okay.
Admitting that you're slowing down or taking a break, it can be seen as a weakness.
Like they're afraid of looking like they're losing their edge?
Exactly.
But companies need both phases to really succeed, right?
Of course.
Wartime allows for that quick innovation and focused execution.
Right.
And then peacetime gives them the chance to consolidate their wins, build a strong foundation, and focus on the long-term health of the company and the people who work there.
It's like that balance between pushing really hard and then taking a break to rest and recharge.
It's that classic wisdom of knowing when to sprint and when to rest.
Yeah, both are important for reaching your full potential.
And Oras makes this interesting point about how these phases tend to happen in the life of a successful tech company.
Mm.
He says it often starts with wartime in those early days when the company is just starting out and trying to raise money.
It's all about building the product, proving that it works, and getting those investments.
It's a fight for survival, basically.
Exactly.
And then, after they get some funding, there's usually a little bit of peacetime.
Okay.
The team can take a breath, hire more people, and get ready for more growth.
Makes sense.
But then, as competition gets tougher or new problems come up, the company probably swings back to wartime to defend what they've built and take advantage of new opportunities.
It's this back and forth, this natural rhythm.
Yeah, and this can happen several times as the company grows up, especially as they get closer to maybe going public.
Mm-hmm.
Once they go public, there's usually a stronger push for peacetime
Right?
because now they have to focus on things like meeting the expectations of their investors, building a stable and profitable business, and creating long-term value.
It's a different set of priorities.
It is, but I bet even with all that, some companies just love that constant wartime energy,
You're right. Some companies just seem to thrive on it.
like they're always in battle mode.
Yeah, but that raises a question. Can a company really stay in wartime mode forever? Is that even sustainable?
Well, Ora says it's not. He thinks that being in wartime all the time eventually leads to people leaving, burnout, and trouble with making long-term plans.
It's like trying to run a marathon as fast as you can the whole time.
You might start strong, but you're going to crash eventually.
And even those people who really like wartime, even they need a break sometime.
Right. Everyone needs time to recharge.
To come back with fresh energy and ideas.
Exactly. So for all of you listening, what does this all mean for you? Why should you care about this whole wartime versus peacetime thing?
Well, I think the main takeaway is to be adaptable.
Okay.
Understanding how wartime and peacetime work can help you do well in any job,
Mm.
whether you're at a fast-growing startup or a big company.
It's about being able to see the signs, understand the challenges, and adjust how you approach things.
And probably the most important thing is to realize that these shifts are just a natural part of how businesses work.
So it's not about always being in wartime or peacetime.
Right.
It's about knowing how to handle both effectively.
Exactly. It's about being strategic and knowing how to play the game no matter what the situation is.
Now, as we get to the last part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. So we've talked about spotting the signs of wartime and peacetime at the company level. But what about within your own team or department? Like, even if the whole company's in peacetime, couldn't your team be facing its own kind of mini wartime?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like those Russian nesting dolls. Each one has its own little world going on inside.
Right. So how would someone actually recognize those shifts within their own team?
Well, think about the same things we talked about before, but on a smaller scale.
Okay.
Like maybe there's a sudden rush to finish a project,
Hmm.
or someone important on the team leaves and everyone's scrambling to cover their work.
Yeah.
You might even notice that the way people talk to each other changes. It becomes more about giving orders and getting things done.
More direct and less chit-chat.
Exactly.
So how do people's work habits change when their team goes into this mini wartime?
Well, you might see people working later, taking on extra tasks, and just focusing on getting results fast.
Makes sense.
They might not have time for things like brainstorming or getting everyone to agree on decisions.
It's all about speed and efficiency.
Right, because in those moments, making quick decisions is the most important thing.
So being able to pick up on those subtle signs can help you adjust how you work and what you expect from others.
Yeah, it's about being adaptable and understanding the situation, even if no one officially announces that things have changed.
It's like having a good sense of what's going on around you and knowing how to act accordingly.
Exactly. And being aware of those things can make you a better teammate.
Right, because you can anticipate what's needed, communicate effectively, and contribute even when things are stressful.
You become someone that everyone wants to have on their team no matter what's going on.
This has been a really interesting discussion. So to wrap up, I think the biggest takeaway from our deep dive is that understanding wartime and peacetime isn't just about tech companies.
Right, it goes beyond that.
It's about understanding how people act and how organizations work, no matter what industry you're in or what job you have.
And recognizing that both of these phases are just different ways of working, neither one is better or worse.
It's all about being flexible, knowing what to look for, and adjusting your approach to fit the situation.
And sometimes it's also about knowing when you personally need to shift from wartime to peacetime to avoid burning out and take care of yourself.
That's a great point. It's not just about the company or the team, it's about taking care of yourself too.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between working hard and taking breaks to recharge.
So recognizing that it's okay to not be in wartime mode all the time.
Absolutely. In fact, taking breaks is essential for being successful in the long run.
This has been such a great conversation. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of wartime and peacetime.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and maybe even got you thinking a little differently about your own work environment.
We always love hearing from our listeners.
Yes, so please share your thoughts and experiences with us on social media. Let's keep the conversation going and learn from each other.
Until next time.